Welcome to the omnigamersclub podcast, the podcast for games on all platforms, including running the gauntlet of charity pamphlets during the Edinburgh Film Festival. Not charity, sorry, comedy pamphlets. Feels like dodging the charity pamphlet sometimes. But that was I was just in Edinburgh for my vacation. I am back now. Thank you, Mark, and to our guests for holding the fort. It was great fun to listen to to listen to the podcast for myself for the first time in a while. I guess I should probably introduce myself. I am Daniel Winter.
Yes, welcome back, Daniel Winter. I'm Mark USA, your co-host, if you don't remember me.
It's been a little longer since I've been on here, so yeah, just to distinguish those voices. But we've both had a little bit of a vacation, coming back refreshed, hopefully, and ready to talk about some games. We've got a lot of news to talk about, or that we could be talking about. But I think we'll work something a little bit different today.
Yeah, we actually attended a local event, so I'm sure we'll talk about that. Maybe it'll provide us material to touch back on for weeks to come, because it's all about new, fresh games.
Yeah. So we're going to just to ease back into things post-vacation. We're bringing you a playlist today of some of the games we've been talking about and some other things that have been going on. And we'll be bringing you back to our regularly scheduled feature game next week. Stay tuned to find out what that is. So with that said, shall we get to some news-ish discussions? So we're both quite acquainted with the local board game design scene, but what we haven't had much direct connection with is the local video game design scene. There's obviously a few big studios here in Vancouver. We've had EA and Capcom had a big presence here until recently. A couple of other medium-sized studios like Clay. But there's also, obviously, as you can imagine, a lot of indie creators, both small independent and small teams creating games in various ways. So this last weekend, we managed to attend a little showcase called the Vancouver Game Garden. Oh, lovely! I meant to grab one of those. For listeners, Mark has a very svelte poster there showing that off. So yeah, so it was basically in one of the town halls here. A couple of local designers put on a bunch of booths for people to show off their games. I overheard someone say that they had somewhere between 70 and 80 applications and only had room for about half of that. So about 35 fresh new games to check out in the Game Garden.
It was really packed. It's not a huge space, but every single corner was stuffed, the inside and wrapping around. And, I thought I would be in and out of there. I showed up with my kid, and I thought it would be too boring and that they would want to leave right away. But I think my kid and I were there for about 2 hours, probably all told, just going around and around and looking at a lot of things.
Yeah, we meant to check this out together, but some delays meant we were a little bit staggered. But by the time I left, the line was even longer. There was quite a lot of interest in checking out these games. So yeah, I thought we'd just do a quick overview of some of the highlights of what we saw there. These were obviously
great.
games in various states of completion. There were a few final released games, a few very early production games, some from game jams or fairly close to being completed in various ways. So yeah, what was a highlight for you, Mark?
Yeah, there was such a great variety of games, so just that was very pleasing, and it was also nice to take my kid because they're interested in game development as a future potential career. Obviously, indies, a lot of them were on the younger side, very diverse crowd, a blend of all genders, and
yeah, it was great to see some diversity representation there.
So that was fantastic to see. I'm just going to mention a few highlights. There was I have some accoutrement here, but I don't think I'm going to have time to show them all. But there was a very cute Pokemon inspired competitive volleyball game, but with friendship, called Beastie Ball. There was some fantastic art associated with that, and the artist and one of the developers was there, gave a great introduction to that. So
I believe he was actually the one who organized the garden.
Oh, very good. Yeah, you can find out more at Beastie Ball. That's the name of the game. Beastie Ball, BEASTIE footballgame.com. So there's one.
I didn't have a chance to check that out myself, but I did see he had all the cardboard cutouts of all the beasties scattered around. They were very cute.
Absolutely, yeah. The illustration is just going to draw you right in. They're very very unique looking. There was a kind of a surrealistic, quite another attractive visually game there. It's early on, so it's not going to be out for a while, but it was called the Dream Recorder. I think I was talking to the artist behind it, who's apparently a comic book artist.
Yes.
And
Sean Caramaker, I think his name. I might be mispronouncing that.
Yeah, that's probably right, because his email address is at Seance Collective, which includes Sean, so that makes sense. And the game is called Dream Recorder. He said probably 2026, 27. Little ways out there, but really quite promising already with the visuals, just the sketches. It looks like a really kind of lush visual production, almost like claymation style a little bit. But I think it was potentially 3D modeled or rotoscoped, kind of like Harold Halibut reminded me a little bit of the direction of that.
More sort of paper crafty looking, I felt.
Yeah.
He had these like notebooks where he'd done the illustrations and completely like storyboarded out in comic form the story. It's some beautiful sketches, a very strong sense of character and world design going into that already. I believe he was actually one of the artists behind Inscription, which is a favorite game of mine.
I did hear that as well. Yeah, so very handcrafted. That's going to be another stunner from the visual perspective.
And you play as a cat, so there's that.
Oh, there you go. And my oldest kid, who I was with, they were very enamored with a title that you can wishlist now on Steam if you want, but it's not yet available. It's called Captain Soda. It's kind of like a 2D platform, but maybe a little bit like combat multiplayer inspired. I don't know if it actually has multiplayer because I only saw the one character, but it's just like very, very unique visual style. I think your character is kind of like a golem made out of like soda cans.
It's reminiscent a little bit of those sort of that Super Nintendo 2D platformer era with like Booger Man and like the Cool Spot Man.
But yeah, very polished looking title.
That one's quite getting close to finished, I believe.
Right, and it's supposed to be coming to Switch as well, so maybe you can catch that later in the year when it comes out. Another title that caught me that was really had a great display with a lot of kind of decorations up was a title called Worms Have 5 Hearts. And I don't know how to describe it. It looks very kind of like lo-fi. It's a 2D, it's a very atmospheric kind of platformer where you play as a worm. And I was just kind of getting these like, this is an odd comparison, but it was a little bit like Morkborg or kind of surrealistic, unnerving.
Very sort of heavy metal horror aesthetic.
Yeah, and that just kind of drew me in as a cool style. Very unique style, so I'm looking forward to seeing more from that.
I only got a quick glimpse at that, but there's some very cool worm physics, like you stretch yourself out, or stretch yourself upwards, and then snap up to jump, basically.
That's right. It was a bit tricky, actually, the controls, but obviously well considered and programmed. And then the last title I'll mention, I can mention a lot. There was so much to see there, and very, very encouraging that my list of highlights is totally different from your list of highlights.
Yes.
When I compare our notes. Last title I'll mention is one called Kill the Music, and it's kind of like a rhythm combat game. So it has from the distance it looks like a isometric combat game like a Hades like, but the action is controlled through timing with the beat, and you can unlock various instruments which will give you additional attacks. And if you match to the beat, then you get, tight combos, and then you could pull off a solo. So I guess maybe the closest comparison would be to compare it with, Hi-Fi Rush meets Hades, sort of very stylish.
Okay, yeah, so I saw quite a few rhythm games there. There was, I can't remember the publisher's name, but the creators of Crypt of the Necrodancer had their next game, Rift of the Necrodancer. Oh, there you go. Handy postcard there from Mark. I didn't have a chance to look too closely at that, but I mean, that's going to have a pretty wide release, I imagine, anyway. So yeah, lots of rhythm games. Oh, a couple of the quirks I saw just quickly was that there was one fellow there selling Game Boy cartridges. Like basically, he'd bootleg made his own game on Game Boy cartridges that, as far as I know, operate on regular Game Boys. I would have liked to talk to him about what was going into that, but it was very popular, as you can imagine. And I don't know if my Game Boy is still functioning. It's gathering dust somewhere around here.
Yeah, I have at least one working Game Boy, so I should have picked that up, but I just didn't have the cash on hand. But it was very cool to see. Sorry, one last game I'm going to mention, a title called Spore Bloom. Don't know if you
Yes,
saw it,
that was on my list. Yeah,
but it looks like a kind of a strategic potential. I think it's a turn-based strategy game.
yeah. I get some sort of board gamey sort of area control vibes.
Yeah,
I think he described it as a bit of a Civ game.
right. Yeah, there was basically you have this whole like army or variety of different types of spore type creatures, and I was kind of drawn in by the artwork. So there was this picture of like all the different subspecies and types of spores and
Jake, the creator, had a notebook of all his sketches, and he's obviously very very well researched into mushrooms. And he was talking to some others about like the local foraging and mycology groups, and quite well versed and giving a lot of direct knowledge into the different types of mushrooms and how they spread as part of this sort of area control game, I guess.
Right. So it was very well considered and it was very kind of lush from a visual perspective. And it was playing with strategy, types of game genres that I enjoy. So that's definitely on my list as well.
Yeah, apparently my wife has actually worked with Jake on some animation projects previously. So yeah, obviously a strong artistic aesthetic going into that one.
Okay, cool. Yeah, why don't you tell us some
Yeah,
games?
well, just one other one that I wanted to quickly mention before I forget, because I forgot to write this down, is called After Work. I believe you saw this as well. That it was basically, it looks a little bit like the Stanley Parable in that it's sort of very grey office space sort of vibes, but exploring the horror of you're the last person to leave the office. Everyone else is gone. The lights are out, and I think you might be locked in the office. I'm not sure, but there's something happened at the work picnic last week. What happened? Why is everyone so angry and upset? Basically, I think you're like digging through everyone else's computers while they're away and trying to piece together what happened. And I mean, other than the discomfort of like spying on other people, there was some interesting sort of social puzzle jigsawing together sort of social elements there. I saw someone else playing a game of solitaire on one of the computers. So some great sort of simulated workstation work going into that. So that was After Work. Oh, and my cat has now given his cameo for the episode.
Yeah, I have one nipping at my heels as well. So we're both being simultaneously attacked by our felines here.
Just a couple of other quick messages, a couple of other quick games. There was a sort of character platformer, 3D low poly platformer, but it seems to be differentiating itself in terms of being all about music as sort of traversal mechanics. So you're learning songs or new instruments and casting those as spells as basically abilities to get around this world. There's also a multiplayer element. They were basically saying that your sort of Steam friends will seamlessly get dropped into your world, almost like sort of Journey style. But as someone who's a big fan of Ocarina of Time, is my touchstone. Using music to influence the world is a theme I really enjoy. And it also had this. It was like you're playing as insects and frogs, and so very cute sort of swamp aesthetic going on there. That's live at Strummer's Pond by Sarah Duck, I think was the main developer working on that. There was a few people involved. One other quick highlight was I spoke to Chevy Ray, who designed Iconfell. So this was a game that came out a few years ago that I actually played on Game Pass and quite enjoyed. I wasn't able to finish it before it left, unfortunately. But I was chatting to him, and anecdotally, he seemed quite sort of positive on Game Pass being a good value as an indie developer, which is good to hear. I know it's been a bit of a sore point and a bit of a little unknown as to what the economics of that are. But he was also showing off another game called Noise One, and so this is basically a horror stealth typing game. Basically, have a simulated sort of workstation. It looks like DOS, like the old just type, very very like black screen, simple fonts, typing in commands like scan terminal 1, scan terminal 2, and you're basically you have an ASCII display of a sort of facility layout, like there's a character who's represented by an at, and various guards that are represented by this letters, and so it's just all very simple graphic displays, and you're inputting commands, opening doors, accessing terminals to have someone move through this facility, basically. And they're talking to you, so you get a bit of a narrative element there. There's also just a really strong sound design, like great keyboard clacking, computer goes brrr sort of sound effects. And so that was when I got home. That was the first thing I downloaded. That's available right now on Itch.io. That's Noise One.
Yeah, it has a very strong kind of rogue / NetHack aesthetic to it.
Yes, yeah, that was what put mine to me. Let me just have a quick look here. There was one called The Last Winter Night by Endesis, which was I saw a couple of sort of visual novel style games, and again, I'm not particularly familiar with that genre and how they sort of stand apart. But this one had a cool, sort of very gothic, sort of Dark Soulsy medieval gothic theme or aesthetic, I should say. That you don't see that often in that genre. It reminded me a little bit of, is it Slay the Princess? Very, very sort of pencil sketchy illustration style, but basically you're playing as a haunted suit of armor, and it was just a cool, seems like a cool theme, very sort of gothic tone, a little different than what the sort of more anime aesthetic that you often see in that genre. So curious to see more about that. And I think that's about it for me. I don't want to drag this out too long. I could talk about 10 more games, but
there were so many great titles.
Yeah.
Not to mention a couple of big ones. So Darkest Dungeon 2 was probably the biggest title. So you got these snazzy stickers and nice.
I couldn't get close to that booth.
Oh wow, it was swarmed, was it? Yeah, there was a surprising amount of swag from all the booths. So real kudos to all the independents and all the studios that were running those booths, because they put in a lot of effort in it, and it showed. I think everyone came away impressed.
Yeah, it was great to see so much love for sort of independent creators and a lot of creativity. I should mention, just before I forget again, one other group I spoke to was called Big Team, and they were a group of basically game jam collaborators. They were showcasing off a collection of like 9 different games. They said they'd won a couple of awards for it. Yes, I have that sticker too. And basically, they had made these booklets for like representing each of the projects they'd worked on, and like people dropping in and dropping out of each project. And it just seemed like a really cool, casual, collaborative process, sort of workshopping some simple ideas. I didn't get a demo of any of them, but like one was a tower defense game that was all on the back of a giant turtle. It was just a cool concept. So yeah, there's a lot of creativity of all scales and all sizes going on in Vancouver.
Well, certainly. All right, I want to mention another news story before I forget, because it's sort of like time sensitive. So DriveThruRPG, I discovered last night, is having a fundraising sort of, I guess, promotion for Meg Baker, who is one of the 2 designers of Apocalypse World in 2nd edition. So Apocalypse World is the A in PBTA RPGs, very influential. So they have a bundle going on. It's called Meguey Baker versus Cancer, and it includes some really decent titles that I was actually interested in playing. Like, I didn't have a copy of Apocalypse World, so if you're looking for a nice bundle for a good cost, go check that out on DriveThruRPG.
Excellent. Any other news you wanted to bring up?
It's a big topic, but I'm just going to touch upon it. Yeah, of course, I'm reading about the backlash for against Wizards of the Coast.
More backlash,
for the probably predictable D&D Beyond unforced error that they've committed. The long and the short of it is that they have reversed course, embarrassingly so.
You can set your clock by wizards creating backlash and reverting it.
Yeah. So they have reverse course because they are essentially removed 2014 version rules for the player's handbook because they thought everyone would, of course, want to switch to the 2024 version of the player's handbook that just came out. And they said, you know what? Everyone who didn't upgrade, you should just go recreate that stuff that we had just the other day. We've had for the past many years. You should just recreate those things as homebrews. And wouldn't you know it, the D&D playing population just kind of lost their heads, rightfully so, about this. And the good news is Wizards changed course on this, but they didn't have to make that choice. I don't know who's running that ship, but they're just making some real
Someone who
boneheaded
needs
decisions.
money, apparently,
Right.
as is publicly traded companies. Yeah, I saw some interesting reporting on this from Rascal News, talking about how
Right.
like they've really put themselves into a grey area in this sort of half step of a new edition, and like, is it a vital new edition that you need to play the game, or is it not important with everything backwards compatible? And you sort of stuck halfway in between here, wanting to justify people buying the new edition, but wanting to still convince people that their old material is still backwards compatible to buy the old stuff. So it's a bit of a tricky one.
Yeah, I read some material on Rascal News as well. Great new news source, by the way, that everyone should check out, as well as Polygon.com was doing some decent reporting as well. There was a horror story article from months ago on Rascal News about essentially comparing the vision for Dungeons and Dragons sort of roadmap for the future. If you want to predict what that's going to look like, just look at what they're doing with Magic the Gathering. Basically, it's going to be digital licensing of IPs and of licensing of the IP itself to other media like video games, movies, graphic novels, all that sort of stuff, because that makes more money than actually selling copies of
They
the player's
can sell you
handbook.
those sweet microtransactions, Mark. That's the problem
Right.
with D&D being so big and having an official digital platform is, well, when everything's official, they have full control and regulation over how exactly things get represented in there.
Yeah, that's right. They're pulling an Adobe, they're pulling a Microsoft 365. They want to charge you every month for the rest of your life. And that's the goal, everyone. So just be ready.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not playing D&D right now, so I don't have to grapple with that decision.
Yeah, there's lots of different games out there, but I've said that
Yes,
before, so
we'll talk
I'll
about some of
stop
those
right there.
later.
There you go. Any more news for you?
No, I mean, there's plenty I could talk about. I mean, Tango Gameworks, back from the dead, apparently.
Oh, wow.
It was saved by an investor, so apparently still alive. Wilmot's Warehouse, a video game that I've enjoyed in the past. So they have both a sequel and a board game just announced. So I've not had a chance to look too deeply into that yet, but fun to see Wilmot getting another spotlight. So yeah, I wanted to focus today on that Game Garden and talk about some local highlights. So with that said, shall we roll into what we've been playing?
Let's do it. Let's talk about games. Okay, good. My cat is settling down. He was just attacking a piece of plastic on the ground, and I was going to throttle him. So I don't have to do that now. No cats were harmed in the recording of this episode.
Yeah, I think mine's going to search for some plastic bags in the games room.
There you go. Why don't you start us off with games that you've been playing?
Yeah, so let's talk that with some video games. So obviously you've been traveling a lot lately, so I took my Switch with me. Intended to play a couple of puzzle games that I lined up on that, but in the grand scheme of being a little jet lagged and just tired from trying to coordinate a family vacation, I basically ended up playing a whole lot of Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Didn't want it to. I've talked about this in the past. It's that's a very busy game, I shall say. There's just menus upon menus, add systems upon systems that I never fully understood, but it's a good game to just grind while you listen to some podcasts. Basically, I am enjoying it. It's got a lot of sort of endorphin rush sort of positive feedback of loot popping off and numbers going up. So gradually working my way through that. But one of the puzzle games I did load up and wanted to try some more of was called Arranger, a puzzly tile laying game, I think is the full title. But I've been playing a little bit of that since I got back. The whole world is basically tiles. So a little bit like, let me try and describe this, a little bit like a sort of Rubik's Cube, where if it's a square grid, if you move to either side or up or down, the entire world on that row moves with you. So any trees that are in that row also move along. And so you can basically move the tiles, move objects around the world as you move. And basically the whole world is this. It's not segmented levels. It's basically a sort of not open world, but sort of fairly linear progression through multiple areas. When you're moving from one space to another, you're still moving the entire world through these tiles. So it's hard to tell where the puzzles end and the world exploration begins, but it's all puzzles all the way down. They play with that and some interesting ideas. It's all like organically integrated. So again, you're not like having a dialogue and then time to load into the puzzle world. It's everything's just in there together. So you might talk to a character that says, "Oh, I want to get to the top of the mountain." Well, then you start moving up and you drag them with you, and there'll be some there'll be some puzzles in trying to navigate them past obstacles. There's something called the static, which is basically objects that can't be moved, and you might bump, like if a tree is moving into it, then you can't move up that row anymore. So you've got to navigate around these sort of locked static pieces. But the trick is, I heard Patrick Klepek was talking about this game on a Remap Radio, and how basically, as someone who's terrible with puzzle games, who likes the idea of them but struggles to sort of find the solution, it's a game where you're always making some progress. Like where even you're just moving pieces around, and if you're stuck, just moving around, and everything is constantly in motion. And so it's kind of like those sliding puzzles, right? Where you've got a 3x3 grid and there's a gap, and you have to like slide them into place. It's a little bit like that, where even if you can't quite see the solution, just move things around, and then suddenly something will click, right? So you can always be making some progress, or at least be doing something with your hands rather than just staring at it and figuring out the perfect solution. And it's sometimes hard to figure out exactly, like, is there an explicit solution, or is this a sort of more open-ended, just moving this thing around the space? So again, a little bit ambiguous sometimes as to what actually is a puzzle and what's not. But at the same time, everything is like fully integrated into this world in some really interesting ways.
That's cool. That description vaguely reminds me of a game which I own but I haven't played, a PC game and on console called Gorogoa.
Yeah,
Maybe you've seen that. It has a grid, but I think it's 2x2 rather than 3x3.
Yes,
and the panels sort of like interact with each other.
That had a lot going on in each of those 4 panels. There was a lot going on. You sort of zoom in and zoom out in those. But this is more of like a screen might be a 10x10 with like little pathways going off each way and sliding back and forth. So yeah, slightly different style of puzzle solving, but no, it's reminiscent of some sort of not quite board games, but those sort of those sliding puzzle physical games.
Nice. All right, I'm going to mention something totally different.
Mm-hmm.
So I was playing, I think, on my Lenovo Legion Go, a title that I bought for like $5 on a Steam sale some time ago. And so it is available on Steam and probably other platforms as well. It's called Huntdown. So Huntdown is, if I can describe this, well, first off, it's very, very much retro styled. So basically, this looks like the most beautiful Super Nintendo game you ever played. It's very, very lush, but the graphical style is that sort of like 16-bit, hyper-saturated, side-scrolling action type game. It's kind of like a cross between, say, Contra and like a Double Dragon or something like that. So I guess more Contra because there's no like terrain you're walking up and down. There's just like platforms. But the action is really tight. It's got this over-the-top kind of, gangs are out of control. You got to take them down as one of these 3 hard-boiled law enforcers. Not quite to that RoboCop extreme, but almost there. And I played through it, beat the first boss. It's really tight. This game has a lot going for it, and it's well worth $5 or $6 Canadian for the game, and probably more. That said, I haven't played an extensive amount of it, so I'll have to reserve my judgment. But very promising so far, and that's Huntdown.
And it's a new game?
It's a new-ish
Okay.
game to me. Yeah, it's not been around a long time.
Mm.
Although around the same time, I'm just going to mention another game just because it's a retro-styled game as well. I played something called Streets of Rage 4,
That's an old game.
which
For the
is
series.
it's an old series. That's right. It's based off of this side-scrolling beat 'em up series from the Sega Genesis era, which I loved, or Master System in Mega Drive in some other regions. And that series always had great music associated with, famous for its music.
Good midis.
And Streets of Rage, it was technically competent. The art looks great. It has 4 kind of very interesting looking characters, some of them returning from the previous titles. But there was something missing from it. It didn't really grab me like I hoped it would. Maybe I'm just beyond that nostalgia, so it didn't really hook me. I also played it single player, which is not, it's always more fun to play those types of games multiplayer. Yeah, like some of the newer retro styled Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle beat 'em ups
I know that one got a lot of good hype.
Yeah. So I'll just mention that was a bit of a disappointment, Streets of Rage 4, but Huntdown pretty darn polished.
Okay, cool. Isn't there another game called like Hunt Showdown or something? They're not really helping themselves with the SEO department. They have a very generic name.
Right.
Huntdown.
What can you do? There's like 10,000 games released every month.
Yeah. Okay.
How about yourself?
I think I'll leave it there for video games. Lot to get into. Any others for you?
I'm going to mention one title briefly because I think you were mentioning it on a previous episode, and I just tried it for myself. It's called Rack and Slay. It's a, I guess, roguelite inspired kind of pool/billiards fantasy analog. And it's really interesting. I think you were saying that like Suzanne, I forget
Suzanne Sheldon from the Salt and Sass podcast. Yeah.
Was mentioning it, and that name kind of stuck in my head, and I saw it was on sale as well. And basically, in it, you're playing as this cartoony cue ball, as you might imagine, and you have to take out these cartoony red ball monsters, and then periodically there's kind of like basically 8-ball monsters that you can't take out until the end.
They all have special abilities, or you have to defeat them in order, or various things. Yeah.
And there's all sorts of wacky things on the table. There's healing, there's power-ups, there's exploding things, there's spikes, there's
treasure.
Yeah, all sorts of things that you can find on the map. And between every single table, which is kind of like a level, you can choose from one of 3 upgrades, and you just continue very much roguelike style. And this game, there is something appealing about it, but I don't know if it could really hook me in the same way that like a Slay the Spire or a Monster Train could.
It's a little too chaotic for that to have that long-term appeal.
Right, and I think, but it's probably more appealing to other players because of that sort of spatiality,
Oh, it's a great proof of concept, and it's fun just watching the physics. Like, I mean, I like to just power up, like full power, just watch the balls bounce around, but that's obviously a terrible strategy to play to actually beat this game.
Yeah, I don't have the patience to line things up perfectly, or even kind of like contemplate, this sort of wild power up is going to work in this way, and how it's going to synergize with another upgrade. Whereas in a turn-based card game, it's quite easy to see how the mechanisms, how the numbers will sort of play off of each other and kind of synergize.
You can control the maths as opposed to the physics that just bounce out of control.
Right. or like a slip of your wrist and you'll make a terrible
It did have
move.
Like you could fine tune it, like with a button. You could like fine tune the direction of the ball.
It gives you a preview of the path that your ball will take.
And that's one of the upgrades, is you can basically like increase the amount of preview that you get.
Yes. So there are a lot of good things going for it. I don't know if it's going to hook me long term, but a very interesting concept. That's Rack and Slay.
Yep, excellent.
All
Okay,
right.
well, let's talk about a couple of board games. So, I took a few with me on vacation, sort of some compact games myself and to play with my daughter. And the one that got played a lot of was called Trailblazers. So this is by Ryan Courtney and Bitewing Games, and it's part of his part of Ryan's pipeline trilogy. I think he's got like an old oeuvre of all that. Those pipes.
Tubes and tubes.
I think the primary one was called Pipeline, which was a big box sort of engine building pick up and deliver game. You're basically drafting tiles with overlapping pipes, obviously, to try and deliver various resources. Whereas this is taking that down to its ultra streamlined essence, and it's basically just a deck of cards with three colored tracks, basically hiking tracks, biking tracks, and rivers. It's basically just three different colors of pipes that are winding on these little, basically domino sized cards, and you're overlapping them to try and create loops. You've got a campsite for each of those three colors, and you're trying to loop as many tracks as you can, starting and returning to the matching campsite. And so obviously you've got these cards that have two or all three colors of tracks on the one card, and so these tracks are looping, intersecting all over the place. And so trying to create three different loops simultaneously is a very fine way to break your brain. So you can play it up to 4 players, I think, but I was playing it largely solo. It's a great solo mode. There's a whole sequence of sort of challenges to work your way through. My daughter saw me playing this and was quite interested. It's just so satisfying to just line up the pipes and just see the geometry, sort of just to see the patterns. Like you're just creating some patterns, and it looks like a desktop screensaver basically of the pipes zigzagging back and forth. And so she wanted to get in on that, and so obviously it's a little tricky for her, but we experimented with some sort of simplified versions where she could like just focus on one of the three colors, and while I played along. And so I'm playing a lot of that. I just realized that it's on Board Game Arena, but they also have all of the solo modes incorporated into that, which is going to be a killer for my lunchtime productivity. So that is Trailblazers.
Yeah, I played a little bit of that. I think I was mentioning to Dennis Ryan and calling it Carcassonne Oops All Roads edition. Of course, there's essentially three different types of roads, quote unquote, right? There's three colors to the routes, I believe. Hiking and then
hiking, biking, and rivers.
Biking. Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
One thing I should mention about that is it's one of very few games where I didn't want to go for the big deluxe version. There is a big box version with like lots of little animal meeples, but there is a travel edition of this game which basically comes in a little carabiner purse, and the cards are exactly the same, very very sort of thick plastic, sort of waterproof cards that all fit into this little square purse, and so you got the entire game and that you can easily throw in your bag and take camping or anywhere with you. So
yeah, it's a really attractive package when you showed it to me at your place. Speaking of your place, we played another small game the other day while I was there.
Yes.
It's a 2-player game because it was only me and you there that night. I'll just say the name. It's called Critters at War, Air, Land, and Sea. And now that might sound familiar to you because this is a re-implementation of a game called Air, Land, and Sea.
Not to be confused with Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea. I think it's in a slightly different order.
No, this one was really interesting. I hadn't played the previous version. I don't know if you had.
Yeah, so this is a reskin of an older game just called Air, Land, and Sea, which was like a World War One or two. One of the World Wars, basically themed around that, with a very sort of realistic depiction.
Yeah, and this time around it's replaced with kind of cutesy creatures and these sort of like very G.I. Joe or Advanced Wars kind of scenarios. Everything's kind of bombastic and over the top cutesy. But it's a really smoothly playing game. I think we learned the rules from scratch in like 5 minutes or so. And there was a little bit of back and forth in terms of how the points score. But it's all really nicely laid out. Like there's a 1-player card and a 2-player card. We noticed that basically you can either just kind of use up all your cards and then have a sort of showdown, showing each other how you fare on either side in one of the three theaters of war, of course, being air, land, and sea. Or you can try and convince your opponent to withdraw early. And basically, if you withdraw early, then you deny your opponent who wins more points. Because if you don't withdraw, then you score a larger maximum amount of points.
The deeper into the
So,
round you get, you're kind of betting that you still have a shot at winning.
yeah, in that sense, it sort of reminded me of, and it's probably the reverse, of a game like what was it, that Marvel Snap has that kind of like snap
Yeah,
double
you
downing,
double down on you think you're going to win. Yeah.
right, which is very smart, kind of
Actually, yeah.
addictive.
Now that you think of it, it's actually quite similar to Marvel Snap in that you got basically got the three lanes that you're playing cards to. It also is a whole genre of these sort of lane battlers like
Right,
Shot and Totten or Battle Line, Smash Up to a lesser
Smash Up.
extent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think there's a game called Kenshi, maybe. Yeah, basically domination of the three best 2 out of 3 wins. So basically simple. The new package is attractive. I don't think I personally would have gone for the dusty old straight up World War II theme myself, not being a war aficionado. But these ones are cute. It's colorful, easy to teach, easy to play, but with a surprising amount of strategic depth. I really enjoyed it. Probably because I won once or twice. Yeah, fun game.
Yeah, so I mean, the entire game is basically 18 cards plus a couple of like reference cards, but 18 cards, and each player gets 6. There'll be 6 that are not in play for any particular round, and and that's the game. Like, so you play one of your cards to one of the theaters of war, and play 6. That's the game. Because there's only 18 cards, every card has a unique ability, or there's some overlap, but broadly unique ability. It has the capacity to completely change the course of this war. With even like generally there's the super powerful cards with a lot of strength, so there's the low cost cards that can move things around more. So you'd be quite clever in sort of setting up moving things from theater to theater or flipping cards over and changing that state, trying to force your opponent to withdraw. But I think part of the charm of that is because it's only 18 cards, you can very quickly get to that point where you know all the cards and can start mind gaming your opponent into what you think they have. And so there's not a huge sort of learning curve to mastering what's possible within the game. You can start again like just memorizing and sort of focusing on those strategies and interactions.
Yeah, a lot of emergent gameplay potential because you'll never quite know what the distribution of the different colors are. Setup could not be easier. I recommend this game and I want to play it again.
It did have me thinking though. Like I too was not particularly interested in the dusty sort of World War One theme, or like that as a theme. Sort of real wars don't interest me, but it did have me thinking in terms of like, this is just a reskin. Like it's just cartoon critters shooting each other rather than real humans, and which has me think like, is it just the aesthetics of war that I don't agree with? Like thematically, this is no different really. So it does it gives you some pause for thought.
No argument there. So speaking of video games and board games, I'm going to talk about a digital board game, which just released an expansion that I was very much anticipating. I really enjoy Dune Imperium digital. I played all the time, but it was getting a little bit dry. So they just released the Rise of Ix expansion, which came out a while ago in digital form, in analog form, just came out on digital, and it does not disappoint. It has same production values, very, very smooth, efficient. You got new leaders. I won't talk about the mechanics because they may be well known, but just to say it breathes a fresh, well needed breath of fresh air into this digital title, which is still solid. Plus, it comes with a few digital only scenarios, which I really enjoy, kind of along the lines of those scenarios in the Through the Ages digital, if you've ever played that one. Kind of remix things that are changing up the rules that you could only do in a digital version of the title. So there's some value there as well. If you already have Dune Imperium, the digital base game, I highly recommend getting Rise of Ix.
Yeah, it's a great little expansion. It adds quite a bit of replayability in those technology tiles that basically add like unique abilities that you can purchase to completely change the like some like sort of engine building basically into Dune Imperium. It's a great game. I did see at Gen Con recently they announced another a physical expansion for the base game.
Very cool. Yeah, Ix really improves the sort of much maligned orange actions in that game, as well as the sort of like quasi okay green actions. Makes those two a lot more interesting and dynamic.
And I think it adds the ships for the
The
dreadnoughts. I think they're
dreadnoughts,
called.
that's right.
Yes, yeah. So another option in the combat layer there.
Yeah, and then there's one faction which I haven't had a chance to play with, but I played against, has like stronger dreadnoughts, which is kind of cool to keep things interesting that way.
Cool. Okay. Shall we jump into some tabletop games?
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't you start us off?
Yeah. So again, I took a few sort of little zine solo TTRPGs with me on vacation, hoping that I might sort of key out some time for some journaling. Again, didn't ended up not really having the attention span for that, but surprised myself coming back and was able to actually get quite motivated by the time I came back to do some journaling. So a couple of things before I look at that. While on vacation, I did find a board game cafe in Edinburgh called Ancient Robot Games. And in addition to so a lot of board games and some nice coffee, they had quite a large selection of independent zines and TRPGs. I tracked down, where are we? I went Into the Odd from Free League Games. I've been trying to track that down for a while. Very cool, weird fiction that I just want to read through the book with no intention of actually playing a campaign. But that one I'm excited to check out. But also a bunch of like truly independent stuff. I found this one called Beak, Feather, and Bone from Possible World, I think is the publisher. But it's basically a competitive map labeling game. So I'm a complete sucker for maps. Love me some game maps. There's games like The Quiet Year in which the game is you creating the map. This gives you a map, and then your goal is to label, basically competitively label it and jostling for factions in this sort of predefined city. So some cool unique things there. One other quick one, Delve from Blackwell Games looks to basically be Dwarf Fortress, basically sort of crafting out a dungeon space for a group of dwarves. So excited to check out all of those. But in the meantime, coming back, I did finally manage to finish the Portal at Hill House, which I've mentioned previously. So this is from Travis and Lindy Hill. So I mentioned previously I was basically using another game called Floor Plan to map out the house that you're later exploring as part of the game. So I finished that and finally was able to dive into the actual journaling aspect of it. And I'd been putting that off, I think, with some trepidation as to, I mean, this is basically writing anxiety. I've not done much actual writing and journaling, and I'm not particularly one with words, I will say. But I was a little shocked just once I started writing, it all just flowed. Like I never really had to stop and think about things. It like just everything just flowed very cleanly, especially when you don't have the anxiety of having an audience. You're not writing for a specific group. No one's ever going to see this. You're not even writing for a particular project. Like my wife and friends have taken part in NaNoWriMo, where like, oh, you got to write 1,000 words a day and have these sort of deadlines and expectations on yourself, versus just writing with no expectations. And so just without any of that sort of doom overhead, I found it surprisingly simple and to journal this. It was as a quick overview, I guess I should say, it's basically a cosmic horror exploring a weird house to look for artifacts. And the benefit of cosmic horror being that it doesn't really matter if things are a little inconsistent or weird. That's kind of the horror is kind of expecting things to be a little bit off, right? So you can kind of play with that and not have to think things through too much. And so it's I mean, I don't have much experience with this to compare, but there was a good balance of prompts while still being quite open-ended to just let you explore things that interested you.
Very nice. I have to admit, I have also not open the floodgates on any solo journaling games myself. I do own some, and I'm very intrigued, and I promise I will start some up soon. Because it's hard to get a group together a lot of
Yeah.
times, and I can see that there are a lot of benefits to journaling. I'm not going to journal myself about my feelings, so maybe I can write about a fictional character, and maybe I could even turn that writing down into something, a project later on. Anyway, so there's lots of great benefits to doing that
Exercise
sort
your
of thing.
demons in a horror journaling game rather than going to therapy. There you
Yeah,
go.
and you're right.
But
Not having an audience is fantastic because it doesn't matter how quote unquote bad it is. Nobody's
mm.
checking it. No one's marking it. It's just for you.
And work is practice too. It's all training, right? And it has given me a little bit more confidence in approaching some more multiplayer games and not feeling like, oh, I suck at being creative. I now know that I do have that capacity within me, especially with these zines. Like, there's very little overhead in terms of trying to read through rules, right? You can just get a couple of prompts down and just start rolling with it.
Very nice. I'm going to mention a couple of RPGs that I
Mm-hmm.
acquired recently, but I haven't played yet. So, sort of caveat there. A new fantasy, rules light fantasy RPG that I just discovered recently. It's called Quest. It has a very, very basic name, but it came out recently in 2019, and it's by designer TC Sotek. And this game might be of interest to you potentially as a parent, but basically it's kid friendly, but
Hmm.
the art is very colorful, but also it's not like pandering to kids or anything like that. It's not like a kids RPG. Kids could play it, but so could their parents, or just straight up adults could play it. So rules light fantasy. Yeah, it doesn't have a lot of the craft or the trappings of more established fantasy worlds to
Hmm.
it. It's kind of generic, but I would imagine flexible enough to take you where you need it to go, especially with players who are not so experienced with tabletop RPGs. So there's a free rule set available for that, so there's no reason not to check it out. That's Quest from TC Sotek.
Interesting. Cool.
And the other RPG I picked up recently from Rain City Games, friendly local game store, is called Eat the Reich. So the game is by Grant Howlett of Honey
Hmm.
Heist, Spire, and Heart
Yeah,
fame.
I was just reading an article on Spire, and I think that's going to go top to my list of things I've got to check out.
Yeah, I'm very interested in Spire as well, and also Heart. I can't remember which one they covered on Quinn's Quest. They covered one or the other,
Yeah, I think so.
or maybe both. And the art is by comic book artist Will Kirkby, and it looks really lush as well. And this book, just the artwork is just 10 out of 10. They knocked it out of the
Hmm.
park with this one. It's lush. It's got this really this hyper like bleeding edge, intense colors to it. It sort of reminds me like of a over the top like LP jacket,
Hmm. A little bit of like
because
80s neon aesthetic, right?
yeah,
Right.
and but also like very sort of hyper color to it too.
Hmm.
And it doesn't have that sort of digest size that a lot of books like um Blades in the Dark or Five Parsecs from Home has. It's kind of wider thing. And this game is interesting in that it's supposed to be a one shot. It's not
Hmm.
supposed to be a long campaign. Sorry, it's supposed to be 2 or 3 sessions.
Got one
But
goal,
it's got one goal, which
and
is,
that is.
spoiler alert, kill Hitler and drink all of his blood, because you play as one of a few of 6 pre-designed characters.
Hmm.
There are
Okay.
no character creation rules because
Huh.
this game is intended to be played with these
So
characters.
just pick up and play, huh?
It's pick
Interesting.
up and play. The rules are fairly straightforward. It's not a big book, but I just got to say this game just feels fresh, tight. It's like a coiled spring. It looks like it's ready to like explode in your face in a good way. And I think with the right group, they'll really respond to it. And I'm really excited to get it to the table. So that's Eat the Reich.
And you get to stake it to Hitler.
Yeah, that's right. And who doesn't want to destroy some evil Nazis? And this game, surprisingly, is also on Alchemy RPG, the sort of theater of the mind VTT, virtual tabletop, that I was mentioning the other day to Kennedy, good key, guest host. So I'm really excited about this platform. Maybe I'll pick it up there as well to try it out, or we can always try it out locally with a group of interested players.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm feeling really motivated around TTRPGs right now. We've both been reading, I mean, spoiler alert, we've both been reading up on Scum and Villainy, and tentatively have a group lined up to start digging into that, maybe covering for a later episode. So, and I've got a few others like Spire and a bunch of others that I'd love to try right now. Also, a few sort of shorter one-off experiences, as previously mentioned. So yeah, lots of options to bite into for the TTRPGs.
So many good games and so many great indie games that you can support.
Yeah, I made the mistake of buying a copy of, not a mistake. I bought Weird Science magazine while I was over in Scotland. I've been trying to track it down for a while, and it's basically a physical magazine all about basically features on the design of RP. It's not just reviews. It's like talking to creators and their inspirations and more thematic sort of explorations of all different topics within the TTRPG space, and also some board games in adjacent areas. And so I've been really enjoying that, but I have been adding quite a few things to my list of things I need to track down and buy.
There's a great magazine culture in the UK. Somehow they're still making it work. Same in Japan. I don't know. It's just the different makeup of the countries. They can keep print media going, but it's great to see.
Yes, yeah, no, I ended up biting the bullet and subscribing to that. The shipping be damned. It's love the physical artifact of having a magazine to read.
Very cool. Well, I hope you will maybe let me see some of those physical artifacts, because a lot of these things are just works of art.
Yeah, lovely graphic design, original artwork in all of these, and yeah, excellent. So, with that said and done, shall we reveal our next featured game?
Let's do it. All right. Do you want to tell the
Do
world
the
what
honors.
we're going to play?
So, we are going to have a little matchup of Unmatched. So this is the game from Restoration Games. So this is the sort of roster of public domain characters having a cage fight. You've got your Dracula and your Achilles going head to head, and some new licensed characters too. So we're going to be looking at that plus the Tales to Amaze cooperative version. So we'll be looking at everything there is to do with Unmatched.
Right. Not quite everything, because there are very, very many expansions and alternate, I guess, factions, you could say, that you could play. And I've only played 3 or 4, so I can't quite speak to all of them. But
It's a large roster, yeah.
there's some interesting stuff to be had, most certainly.
Yeah, so stay tuned for that. If you have an opinion on Unmatched, if you have a favorite character from the roster, let us know. You can contact us at omnigamersclub@gmail.com or on our website, omnigamers.club.
That's right. And if you're listening on podcast, you can check us out. Our videos are going up whenever they're released, about once a week on YouTube. And of course, you can catch us in podcast form on your podcatcher of choice if you want to do it that way as well.
Yeah, YouTube's obviously a much easier way for us to get some statistics and for you to comment on particular episodes and let us know what you've been enjoying. And yeah.
Yeah, and I promise we'll do better on reading the comments and responding to you as well, because there have been a few.
Excellent. Okay, well, with that, shall we go play some games?
Absolutely. Let's leave it there. I want to get back to reading RPG books.
I'm going to go back to playing some Noise 1.
Fantastic. All right. Welcome back, Daniel. It's good to have you back in our fair nation. once more.
Wish there were more magazines here, though.
True. Can't win them all.
Anyway, thanks for listening, everyone. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah. And until next time, have a balanced diet of gaming.
Bye.
Bye.